with growth rates. So the study that we did, the purpose was to look at short-term effects of suppressed strontium on coral growth rates. And the reason that we wanted to do a short-term study is because, as you guys probably well know, strontium is a trace element, and so you'll find strontium in a lot of things that you dose to your aquarium on a regular basis. You'll find small amounts of that. So in general, depending on the aquarist and how they're maintaining their aquarium, you'll end up inadvertently adding some strontium here and there, regardless of what you do. Depending on how often somebody's performing a water change or how well balanced their salt is, all these parameters are going to play into, whether or not somebody ends up with a suppressed strontium level in their aquarium. And most of the time through salt mixes, if they're well balanced, you'll end up replenishing a good bit of strontium through that process. So what I was really interested in seeing is, are there short-term effects? If somebody goes a month without doing a water change and they've got a heavily loaded tank, if they could potentially suppress the strontium levels in their tank, what kind of short-term effects would they see, if any? So short-term study really was more purposeful for what we're doing in our hobby. So in this study, I used 4 different coral species. 18 specimens of each of the species were used, and these are the 4 species that I chose. There were 3 separate systems that were set up. System number 1 is our control system, and I'll get into a little bit more detail about that in just a second. System number 2 was the experimental 1, and system 3 was experimental 2. Each of the systems was 138 liters. There were 24 coral specimens in each tank. 6 of each species were used. Each system had 2 24-watt 10,000 K bulbs, T5HO bulbs, and 2 24-watt 420, 460 nanometer mix actinic bulbs on them, and those were on for a 10-hour cycle. The physical and chemical parameters were kept as consistent as possible. We prepared a synthetic salt of our own and did not add any strontium to the salt when it was made. So all the parameters were matching what you'd want to find in natural seawater, or what you'd want to find in a synthetic salt that's hoping to mimic natural seawater, and no additional strontium was added to the mix. So the salt was mixed specifically for the study. The salt samples were sent off for analysis before using it to determine strontium. There were, of course, trace amounts of strontium in the salt because that's inherent with other chemicals that are used. So it was actually less than 1 milligram per liter of strontium present in the salt. So the synthetic salt was prepared all at one time, so in one big vat for all 3 systems, mixed to a specific gravity of 1.026, and then added to the tanks. So the control tank is where we added the strontium chloride. So we calculated out enough strontium chloride to get us up to natural seawater levels of about 8 parts per million. And then no strontium chloride was added to the other experimental tanks. This is a picture of the setup. It doesn't look very good up there, huh? That's a picture of the setup. You can kind of see the corals in there. The top tank here is the control tank. This was experimental 1 tank and then experimental 2. And you can see there are 24 corals in each tank, and they're spaced appropriately to keep that consistent as well. The tank parameters were monitored frequently, about twice a week. The calcium maintained itself anywhere between 400 and 425 milligrams per liter. The pH was 8.0 to 8.3. Alkalinity 2.4 to 3.4 milliequivalents per liter. magnesium 1300 to 1350 milligrams per liter. And the temperature was maintained, in the morning it was 78 and got up to 80 degrees in the evening. I asterisked that because I had a little bit of difficulty with maintaining the temperature in my experimental tank number 1, which was the middle tank. Because it was insulated by the other 2 tanks, I had difficulty with the temperature in there, so it actually ran about exactly 2 degrees higher Fahrenheit than the other systems did. So instead of starting out at 78 in the morning, it would start out at 80 and creep up to 82 in the afternoon. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute and what I had to do to kind of compensate for it. The technique that I chose for measuring coral growth rate was called the buoyant weight technique. It's a pretty well-known technique that's used for determining calcification and growth rates. I use the analytic balance method for accuracy purposes. The accuracy of the buoyant weight technique actually can allow you to detect differences in weight with the coral between daytime and nighttime. So you can really get a good idea of what kind of growth is going on within a very short period of time. The buoyant weight technique also allows for us to do repeat weighing. So versus something where you've got to destroy the coral and start back over and actually kill the animals in the process, this allowed for me to keep the corals alive and well and continue to weigh them throughout. And it's a pretty simplistic approach. There's basically an equation, which we'll talk about that just briefly in a second, but it's a pretty simplistic way to measure buoyant weight in a very accurate manner. So that was why I chose this. So the buoyant weight technique is, I think they started using it in the 70s, in the 1970s, and it's been improved upon since then by other people. And it's based on an Archimedes principle, which says that the weight of an object in air is equal to the object's weight plus the weight of the liquid displaced by the object. So essentially what you have to do, and I'll show you in just a second, I have a couple of pictures of how we did this, but essentially what you have to do is measure the buoyant weight of a specimen, know its density, know the density of the water that you're weighing it in, and obviously know the density of the water that you're weighing it in, and then you can calculate out a dry weight from that equation. And I included a couple of pictures so you guys can see how the process kind of works. I'm having a hard time viewing it from this angle, but if you look here, I've got an analytical balance on top, and it's sitting on top of this chamber that was built to keep the draft from affecting it. This analytical balance read the 5 significant figures, so it's very sensitive to drafts, as most analytical balances are. So we built this chamber here, and there was a hole drilled in the top, and the bottom of the analytical balance has an underhook feature where you can place a string or something along those lines on the hook and send it through the hole in the top of the chamber and do your weighings underneath here. So this is a picture of weighing one of the corals. What we did was we had circular acrylic discs that the corals were mounted on, and there was a little bit of monofilament fishing line that was looped around so that we could hang it on the hook, and the corals were buoyant weighed by that. So the duration of the experiment that I did was, like I said, I wanted to do about a month period, so we did a 4-week study. The corals were buoyant weighed on day 1 of the study, and then again on day 28. Water changes were performed bi-weekly, so I basically did a 100% water change when the water was changed out, and started all over with the parameters, because I figured, that the difference in the calcium and things like that would be remedied by doing a large water change and replacing just all of the water versus having the variation in parameters continue.